All right, commissioners, we are good to go. Staff, we're good to go. Good morning, everybody. The time is 10:01, and I'll call the October 3rd, 2024 Planning Board meeting to order. We are joined by our Vice Chair, Ms. Bailey. Good morning, Ms. Bailey.
Good morning.
We have Commissioner Giraldo as well.
Good morning.
Commissioner Washington.
Good morning.
And Commissioner Dorner.
How you doing?
And I am Chair Shapiro. Moving forward to the business at hand, please note that the deadline for all participant pre-registration and for all submission of materials and exhibits was 12 noon on the Tuesday before this planning board meeting. Registered speakers may join the meeting with a link provided in the email provided by the planning board office or listen by phone by utilizing the call-in number provided in the email. Of course, anyone can tune in to watch our meetings via live stream. And if you wish to speak or become a person of record, the way to access us is on the screen before you. In addition to our commissioners, we're joined by our senior counsel, Lisa Coleman. We also have Jessica Jones, our planning board administrator, Joe Parsons, our senior technical hearing writer, and Sherry Connor, the acting development review division chief. And thanks, as always, to Mr. Flanagan and Mr. Cron for helping us with technology behind the scenes. We're going to take the order of cases as listed, and that'll become obvious why as we go through the morning. So let us start with item 2 on our agenda. I would look for a motion to approve the draft minutes of September 26, 2024.
Motion to approve draft minutes.
I second.
I've got a motion by Vice Chair Bailey and a second by Commissioner Washington. With no discussion, I'll call the roll. Vice Chair Bailey.
But aye.
Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Giraldo.
I vote aye.
Thank you. We have no legislative items, updates, so we'll move on to item
Chair,
3.
you didn't vote or close out the motion.
I didn't do what?
Vote
We
or
did a
close
roll
out
call.
the motion.
We did a roll call vote.
I heard everyone do a roll call except for him and close out.
Oh, I'm sorry. I vote aye. The ayes have it 5-0. Thank you. All right, that's fair. I got to meet you halfway. Okay. Thank you for that. No legislative updates, and we will now move on to item 3C on our agenda. We have a FY26 budget outlook. We have Terry Bacote-Charles, our corporate budget director, who will be presenting this. Ms. Bacote-Charles, you on the line? We'll hold off on this and we'll keep moving through the agenda, and then depending on her and how the morning goes, we'll come back to it, okay? If there's no objection from that, commissioners, we're all right?
Great.
Okay. All right, so we now have our consent agenda. We have items 4A and B of the consent agenda. Anyone who wishes to oppose staff's recommendations on these items, or a board member wishes to discuss those items, if not, I would look for a motion.
Mr. Chair, after consideration of the records for
Got an echo. Keep going. Somebody's got to mute. All right, try again, Ms. Bailey.
after consideration of the records of numbers 4A and 4B, I move adoption of the staff findings and approval of these items on the consent agenda in accordance with the recommendation of staff.
Second.
A motion by Vice Chair Bailey, a second by Commissioner Washington on the consent agenda. If there's no discussion, I will call the roll. Ms. Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Giraldo.
Vote aye.
And I vote aye as well, Ms. Coleman. The ayes have it, 5-0. Next, we'll go on to our regular agenda items. We're going to take up item 5. Let me just give me a sec. Okay. Item 5 on our agenda. This is specific design plan SDP 2302 Woodside Village Meadows at Westmore. This is an evidentiary hearing. I don't think we have anyone who's going to be signed up to speak. We have Mr. Mitchum will give a brief staff presentation, and Mr. Haller, who will be there for any additional comments or questions. Mr. Mitchum, take it away.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Board. For the record, I'm Joshua Mitchum with the Urban Design Section. Item number 5 before you is specific design plan number SDP-2302 for Woodside Village, Meadows at Westmore, which proposes the development of 14 single-family detached and 262 attached dwelling units for a total of 276 proposed units. The application also seeks alternative compliance from Section 4.6-1, buffering residential developments from streets of the 2010 Landscape Manual through alternative compliance application AC-23011. The Alternative Compliance Committee found that since the width of is only impacted on 4 lots, which make up a small portion of the development's total, and the provided plant units exceed requirements in addition to a fence, the applicant's proposal is equally as effective as normal compliance with Section 4.6. The subject property sits on approximately 63.35 acres of land located on the south side of Westphalia Road, approximately 2,000 square feet from its intersection with Ritchie Marlborough Road. The site has frontage on Westphalia Road, a designated historic roadway along its northern boundary. The specific design plan proposes a mix of attached and detached dwelling units. According to the SDP, it proposes 4 architectural models for the townhomes units, the Beck, Heartland, Hugo, and Jenkins, and 4 units for the detached units, the Jocelyn, Scarlin, Sienna, and Finn. The elevations offer a variety of exterior finishes, including brick, stone, and siding. The exterior materials used reflect the housing style for each model and demonstrate unique, adequate front variation and fenestration. Based on evaluation and analysis, Urban Design staff recommend that the Planning Board adopt the findings of this report and approve specific design plan SDP-2302, Type 2 Tree Conservation Plan TCP2-029-2024, and Alternative Compliance Application number AC-23011, subject to the conditions of approval stated within the technical staff report. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchum. Commissioners, unless there's questions for staff, I'll turn to the applicant to see Mr. Haller, if you have anything you want to add on this.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize, my camera does not seem to be working this morning, but that probably is appropriate since I don't have anything to add to Mr. Mitchum's presentation. As Mr. Mitchum noted, this application is from Stanley Martin Homes, and we totally agree with the findings of staff and staff recommendations and have no proposed revisions to the conditions. So we're happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Haller. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, we have no one who has signed up to speak on this. I will close the public hearing. And commissioners, what is your pleasure on this item?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the findings of staff and approve SDP-2302, AC-23011, and TCP2-029-2024, subject to the conditions as outlined in staff's report.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Washington and a second by Vice Chair Bailey. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Washington?
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey?
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner?
Vote aye.
Commissioner Giraldo?
I vote aye.
I vote aye. The ayes have it 5-0. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchum and Mr. Haller. Move on to item 6 on our agenda. This is a preliminary plan of subdivision 4-23040, Stevens Crossing at Brandywine. This actually is a request for a continuance until October 7, 2024. Mr. Diaz-Campbell will be giving a staff comments presentation. Mr. Gibbs is here to answer any additional questions. Mr. Diaz-Campbell, take it away.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, I am Eddie Diaz-Campbell, Planner 3 with the Subdivision Section. Item number 6 on the agenda is the preliminary plan subdivision for Stevens Crossing at Brandywine, 4-23040. The subject project proposes 75 lots and 13 parcels for the development of 75 single-family attached dwellings. Staff is recommending continuance of the case to October 17, 2024, because additional time is needed for staff to evaluate new information received on issues related to public facility adequacy. The applicant agrees with the recommendation for continuance. Staff will be prepared to bring a recommendation on the preliminary plan to the board at the October 17 hearing. This concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz-Campbell. If there's no questions for staff, Mr. Gibbs, anything you want to add?
No, Mr. Chairman, we agree and consent. This, of course, had to do with the police response times that were recent subject of discussion, and we agree with the staff and we join in with the request. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, you have heard the request for continuance. What's your pleasure on this item?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the request to continue preliminary plan 4-230402 to planning board hearing date of October 17, 2024.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Washington, a second by Vice Chair Bailey. There's no discussion on the motion. I'll call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Giraldo.
I vote aye, Mr. Chair.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 5-0. Thank you all. We'll move on to item 7 on our agenda, preliminary plan of subdivision PPS 2024-001 Smith Lake Estates. Another request for a continuance, this time to October 10. Again, we have Mr. Diaz-Campbell and then Mr. Tedesco representing the applicant if we have any additional questions or if he has any comments. Mr. Diaz-Campbell.
Yes, good morning again, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, for the record, Eddie Diaz-Campbell, planner through the subdivision section. Item 7 on the agenda is the preliminary plan of subdivision for Smith Lake Estates, PPS-2024-001. This project proposes 143 lots and 17 parcels for the development of 75 single-family detached dwellings and 68 single-family attached dwellings. Staff is recommending continuance of the case to October 10, 2024, because additional time is needed for staff to evaluate new information received on issues related to public facility adequacy. The applicant agrees with the recommendation for continuance. Staff will be prepared to bring a recommendation on the preliminary plan to the board at the October 10 hearing. This concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz-Campbell. If there's no questions for staff, Mr. Tedesco, anything you want to add in this request for continuance?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. For the record, Matthew Tedesco on behalf of D.R. Horton Incorporated, the applicants for this application. We have no objection. We were asked to accommodate staff's request for this continuance of 1 week, which we were obviously happy to do. I did just want to mention briefly that this is the first property in the county that was recently rezoned to the new RPD zone. The preliminary plan is the next step in the entitlement process, followed by a subsequent detailed site plan. So we look forward to bringing this application to you hopefully next week if this continuance is granted, and then future detailed site plan as well. With that, Mr. Chairman, we have no further comments and would hope that continuance would be granted to accommodate both the applicant and staff and their scheduling. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Tedesco. I do have somebody who signed up to speak. I'm not sure if that's an error or somebody of the applicant's team, Carol Brown.
So Ms. Brown, your staff can advise. Ms. Brown is a resident of the Williamsburg Estate. She lives about 2 miles to the north of here off of Rosaryville Road. I think she wanted to participate, but she had left a voicemail for me, which I called her back. She was hopeful that we would be able to move this to from 2 weeks from today, which I unfortunately cannot accommodate with my schedule, since we work our schedules on Thursdays as much as probably my other colleagues do. We work our Thursday schedules around our planning board schedules, and I have a commitment next on the 17th. So I have reached out to Ms. Brown and will continue to do so to make sure she is fully informed of the application and the process and where we are in that process going forward. But unfortunately, at this time, unable to accommodate, I think, her verbal request to staff to move this from the 10th to the 17th.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Brown, you were not on the line? Okay. Staff, anything you want to add to what Mr. Tedesco has said?
Just that Ms. Brown did call us as well, voice her concerns, and we will be prepared to address those concerns as well on October 10.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Diaz-Campbell. Thank you, Mr. Tedesco. Commissioners, nothing further in this item. What's your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the request to continue preliminary plan 2024-001 to planning board hearing date of October 10, 2024.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Washington, a second by Vice Chair Bailey. If there's no discussion, I will call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Giraldo.
I vote aye, Mr. Chair.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 5-0. Thank you. Move on to item 8 on our agenda, preliminary plan of subdivision PPS 2022-007, the pavilion at Lotsford. This case was continued from September 5. We have Mr. Horn is representing the applicant. We have Ms. Vattendost who's going to be giving a staff presentation. I'm missing anything on this item? No, I am not. We had somebody who signed up to speak, but I think they signed up inadvertently. But we'll see if when I call for that. We'll turn to staff first. Ms. Vattendost.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For the record, I'm Asa Vattendost with the subdivision section. Item number 8 on the agenda is the preliminary plan of subdivision for the pavilion at Lutsford, case number PPS-2022-007. The subject project proposes one parcel for the development of 769 multifamily dwelling units, 72,300 square feet of commercial development, and 6,190 square feet of utility service for WMATA. This case was previously continued from the planning board hearing date of September 5th, 2024 to allow additional time to evaluate the adequacy of public facilities for the property. The staff is in receipt of a letter from the applicant dated September 23rd, 2024, in which the applicant requests a second continuance of the case to October 17, 2024. Additional information regarding transportation was received from the Prince George's County Executive's Office and the Prince George's County Department of Permitting Inspection of Enforcement, for which additional time is needed for review and coordination. Staff is in agreement with the continuance as outlined in the staff's memorandum. If the continuance is granted, additional posting will not be required. The notices of public hearing signs for this application were posted on the subject site on August 6, 2024. This concludes the staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vattendost. Mr. Horn, anything to add on this request for continuance?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the planning board. Well, for the record, Arthur Horn, here's Margot Shipley Horn. Nothing to add, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the opportunity to present this case before you in 2 weeks should the continuance be granted.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Let me just check to make sure there's no one who signed up to speak on this, even though it's just a request for continuance. Do anyone who has signed up to speak on this item? Seeing nobody, commissioners, what is your pleasure on this item?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the request to continue preliminary plan 2022-007 to planning board hearing date of October 17, 2024.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Washington, a second by Vice Chair Bailey. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I will call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Giraldo.
Vote aye, Mr. Chair.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ms. Vattendost, and thank you, Mr. Horn. Item 9 has been withdrawn by the sponsor, so we're not taking that up. And item 10 and 11, these are companion cases. Hold on one sec, folks. Item 10 is detailed site plan DSP 22001 McDonald's Acre Road. Item 11 is departure from design standards DDS 23001 McDonald's Acre Road. This item was continued from September 6th planning board meeting. Before we begin, Mr. Gibbs, apologies. Mr. Gibbs, you have a request for us?
Yes, I do. Good morning. Chair Shapiro, members of the Planning Board, Edward Gibbs, an attorney with offices in Largo, here this morning representing McDonald's USA, LLC, the applicant in this case. Yes, I am asking for a 2-week continuance of this case. Tuesday, I guess it was, at 11:27, I sent an email to staff saying, could you please send any new signups to me, as well as advise me if any new written material had been filed. I got a response from staff about 3 hours later with a sign-up list. I sent another email 5 minutes after that saying, is there any new material? I received a response saying, I do not believe any new material have been filed. I did not learn until approximately 4:30 yesterday that, and by the way, I constantly was checking the site. I did not learn until about 4:30 yesterday that there was material. I did not have access to that material until 7:30 last night. I was continuously checking my computer site, and it turns out that the opposition in this case filed 471 pages of new material. There's just no way that I could professionally or diligently wade through that material starting at 8:30 last night when I got to my home. My client, I would respectfully note, deserves that type of analysis from me. I certainly scanned it. There's a lot of assertions about traffic elements, assertions about trees, and but again, to not have the time to look through that information, especially when the opposition asked for a continuance last week when I had filed about 22 pages, I think it was, on Tuesday at noon. So in any event, with that being said, I'm asking for a 2-week continuance. I would have only asked for a week, but I have to respond by filing a legal memorandum in the Maryland Supreme Court at the end of next week. And so next week is going to be I'm going to be consumed working on that pleading. And so I'm asking for a 2-week deferral here. And I would appreciate the board's positive review of that request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbs. We have, let me see if there are other folks who want to comment on this. Mr. Smith, I see your hand up. You have something you want to add or ask or request or comment on? You're on mute,
Yeah,
Mr. Smith.
Before we move to Mr. Smith, if we could just have Mr. Gibbs request formally on the record an extension to the waiver that he provided. I believe that it is the one that was submitted was date certain until October 9th.
Thank you for that, Mr. Coleman. Mr. Gibbs?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. It had been my understanding that we had done an indefinite waiver, but because this case was filed a year ago, I think. But in any event, yes, we definitely do consent to an extension, a further extension of the action time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbs. And we have Natalia Gomez Rojas, or Ms. Connor, you're going to be taking this from staff perspective.
Yes, staff has no issue with the request for continuance.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Connor. All right, Mr. Smith, you have something you want to add or ask or comment on?
Yeah, in keeping with Mr. Gibbs' statement that he had requested a copy of the registered speakers roster and that he had received that, I had requested a copy of the September 26th roster before that hearing and did not receive it. And I've sent more than one request seeking the speakers roster for this hearing and not received it. So we are cognizant of the fact that these hearings take a lot of time. And that you would like to see well-organized, non-repetitive testimony, and that's why we ask for that. We participate entirely as volunteers, so we'd love to see a timely presentation of speakers roster for this next go-around. I'll note that And I also kept checking the agenda to see whether additional materials had been posted, and they were posted pretty late in the day. With respect to Mr. Howard's request for a 2-week continuance, I just want to note that when we earlier requested a longer continuance, I have no problem with a 2-week continuance for a longer continuance. When we pressed for that longer continuance and based it on a number of factors, including the lack of public availability of a lot of the files that staff is relying on developing a technical staff report, and when I noted that there had in fact been an indefinite hold or waiver on this case, we got a lot of pushback on that. So suddenly that's available as a reason to continue for 2 weeks or preferably more. But when we made the same arguments to you on the basis of fairness, so we can present you with informed public comment, and you can make an informed decision, our request, our rationale, our reasons did not count much. We are grateful that we got the 1-week continuance, but we think we laid out a pretty good case for a longer continuance. I'm not pressing for a longer continuance. I just want to note this disparity and this fundamental imbalance in how these requests for continuances and waivers are approached. So thank you very much. And I also want to note we know that you all had 2 evening hearings this week, so we are appreciative that you put this much time into hearing prep and listening to testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Appreciate that. All right, if there's nobody else, Mr. Boato.
Yes, I want to concur with Greg. When Mr. Gibbs asked for us to not be given 2 weeks, to be given extra time last week, if not for Mr. Dorner, you would have immediately denied that. And now that Mr. Gibbs suddenly needs time, even though he's a professional operation, he's getting paid. We're volunteers. We're not given the same respect. I want that noted on the record.
Thank you, Mr. Boato. Anything else? Anyone else? Mr. Smith, yes?
Yeah, just to reinforce my point, there was some reluctance to grant that continuance last time, even though I cited a section of the code that said if the agency or if the applicant submits new materials on the record, any person of record who requested is entitled to at least a 7-day continuance. But there was a contention over that point. So I can say if we see new material in the record submitted by the applicant, we're entitled to seek and get a continuance the next time. So that's just what the law says. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no other comments on this, and there's no one else who's requesting to speak on this request for continuance. Commissioners, what is your pleasure on this item?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the request to continue DSP-22001 to Planning Board hearing date of October 17, 2024.
Second.
We've got a motion by Commissioner Washington, a second by Vice Chair Bailey. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I will call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Giraldo.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 5-0.
Also, could
Mr.
we,
Smith,
Chair,
yes?
could we have a motion to extend the DDS as well?
I'm sorry. If the maker of the motion and the second of the motion will accept this friendly amendment, both of these are for both these items, the DSP and the DDS. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Coleman, will that do? Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, you have something you want to add?
Yes, as I have with past hearings where there have been continuances, I request that the planning department provide us as soon as possible with a list of all persons of record in Excel, but also that more importantly, that you inform all persons of record by email and perhaps by first class mail that this case has been continued for another 2 weeks. Persons of record registration web form requires folks to provide their email addresses. So it should be a relatively simple matter to mail notice if the case has been continued by 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, commissioners, if there is nothing else before us, Ms. Connor, any further business before us that you have?
I don't think we closed out that vote, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Oh, we didn't?
No.
No.
Oh, well,
Mr.
I
Smith
probably should
said
do
yes.
that. So there's a friendly amendment to this. So this includes both the DSP and the DDS. If there's no further discussion on the motion, did I call the roll? Am I actually here today? What am I doing?
You're actually just an AI bot.
Right.
We're going to turn you off.
Did I call the roll or I need to call the roll?
You need
You
to call
can
the
call
roll.
the roll. Just
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Washington.
vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
I think I'm here today, vote aye.
All right. Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Geraldo.
I vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 5-0. Thank you. This request for continuance has been granted for 2 weeks. And Ms. Connor, any other further business before us?
That would conclude our regular agenda, and I think you just need to circle back to the administrative item 3C.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Connor.
Thank you very much for your consideration. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Mr. Gibbs. Commissioners, let's hang on here. We are not adjourning this meeting. We're going to see if we can figure out this with the corporate budget director, work out the audio issues. There's no other items before us but the budget report. So let's take a 5-minute break and hopefully that'll work out the issues. Okay. See you all. If you put 5 minutes on the clock, folks, and see you all back in 5 minutes. We're having a day. All right. So staff, are we ready? Is Ms. Charles ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
She's just going to be going through the presentation on the phone.
Okay. That works. All right. Chair Coach Charles, Corporate Budget Director, the floor is yours.
Good morning, all. I'm before you to share the outlook for the FY26 budget and beyond. The presentation reflects my attempt to update the previous analytical model and its presentation materials. Next slide, please. This slide here just provides the contents of this overview presentation, which is going to include key trends, review of the outlook, including the revenue and expenditure estimates, the budget strategy based on financial conditions, and the timeline. Next slide. Now moving to our first key trend. First up is the anticipated growth in the assessable base. As shown here, we continue to experience solid, modest growth. Hence, we can continue the assumption for FY26 of around 3%, which is shown here, 2.8%, and we're going to use that for the beyond. And this is in alignment with the county's current OMB forecast expectations. Next slide. This slide shows in the aggregate the property tax revenue trend for our 3 supported funds. As you will recall, this is the primary source of revenue supporting operations. And as noted here, there are slightly varying percentages based on each fund's ability to generate other revenues through service charges. As shown here, in the current year, both the admin and the park are 98% tax dependent, while the recreation fund is about 89%. And that just reflects the expectation of the recreation fund being able to generate nearly $13 million from sales, charges, rentals, and concessions. In terms of the actual aggregated recent performance, as you can see, we have experienced on average an annual growth rate in available tax revenues of about 4.5%, which on average provides the commission an additional $14.7 million in new monies. And I'm referencing that from since 21 for the combined 3 funds. So again, the average annual growth rate is 4.5%, which means we on average have been receiving an additional $15 million in new monies each year. Next slide, please. This slide shows the expenditure trends. And as you can see, it's not quite as linear as revenues were. Starting with the admin fund, which is the darkest part of the bar. Between FY21 and FY24, the administrative fund expenses increased 19.2%. In the last year, year over year, which would be 23 going into the year we just closed out, FY24, admin funds increased by 11.2% or 5.6 million. So that's the bar that you see where it went from 50 to 55 million. The biggest driver of that was in the planning department. But it's important for us to understand that during this period, and again, the period I'm referencing is our last three closed years, revenue growth has exceeded expenditure growth. Revenue growth for that time period was 12.1, and expenditure growth was 8.9. So again, admin fund is solid in that regard. Now turning to the park expenses, which is the middle shaded bar, part of the bar. Park expenses over that same time period, 21 to 24, increased by 5.8%. And in fact, if you're just looking at FY23 to FY24, our last year's experience, expenses actually decreased by 18.7% or 42.9 million. That is what you're seeing, the 220 versus the 187. But that is as expected, because what that's reflecting is the transfer that took place for the Largo headquarters in 23. Doing a similar kind of comparison of revenue growth versus expenditure growth, again, this fund, revenue growth for the time period, the last 3 fiscal years of actuals, exceeded expenditure growth. Revenues grew at 30.4 million, and expenditure growth over that time period was just 10.1. And then finally, our last fund, which is the recreation fund, if you look at the expenses for, again, that same time period, 21 to 24, expenses increased by 27.5%. Year over year, our last year, that comparison of 23 to 24, you see again a decline of it going from 117 to 108. But again, that is just reflective of the fact that there was a $7 million transfer in 23. But the thing I want to call your attention to is, unlike the other 2 funds during this period, expenditure growth did exceed revenue growth for the recreation fund. Expenditure growth was 27.2 million, and revenue growth was 25.2 million. Next slide. Contributing to that overall expenditure trend that we were just looking at is, of course, the largest portion of our budget, personnel expenses. And again, the personnel expense include both compensation, salary, and benefits. As you can see depicted here, since FY22, the average annual growth is nearly 10%, which means that we are on average increasing our personnel expense at a clip of about 17 million for the 3 funds combined. So in the aggregate, the combined fund personnel expense has grown from 168 million in FY22 to us closing out FY24 with the expectation of having spent 202 million. The FY25 budget, which is of course showing a big difference, is just giving you the sense of the fact that we have budgeted in the current year budget 250 million available to support personnel costs. Again, we expended coming out of FY24 202 million. Next slide. This slide is another one of those things that we must keep a watchful eye on. It's our growth in project charges. And as shown here, we are again beginning to experience steady growth in that. And, you know, it could signal that it may be mirroring what we experienced back in FY 2009 to FY 12. So again, this is just showing that we are beginning to see growth in project charges. Next slide. This slide just provides a visual picture of our fund balance status since FY18. And really what it's trying to show is whether we use the fund balance or add to the fund balance. So the blues that are positive are the situations where we're adding to the fund balance. So for looking at just the admin fund, you can see that we have added to the fund balance with the exception of FY21, which was planned because that was when we took reserves to support the Largo headquarters. For Park and Recreation Fund, you can see that we typically budget for use. Again, the budget is the orange one. And the respective blue bars are the actuals. And in most instances, you see we come in better than expected. So we anticipate having to use reserves, but in fact, don't have to use them as much as we initially planned or thought we would. Next slide. Now, this is moving into the budget outlook and based on the model update. First, we'll start with revenue. This slide is just displaying what the anticipated growth in available tax revenue will be when we use that 2.8% growth rate in the assessable base, and we assume no change in the tax rate. The admin fund will see nearly $1.5 million more. That alone won't be able to cover the growth just experienced in FY24 expenditures. The park fund will see $4 million in tax revenue growth. This comparison is a bit more favorable in that the $4 million, the projected $4 million here, will likely will cover the growth we just experienced in FY24 for the non-CIP related operating expenses. So our growth for non-CIP related operating expenses in the park fund was $3 million, going from 23 to 24. And again, this is saying that we'll get $4 million. And then the last one is the recreation fund. And this again is suggesting that we will get $2.1 million more in tax revenues for use during FY26. Again, this is a situation where that amount does not cover what we just experienced in FY24, which was expenditure growth of $7.5 million for non-CIP expenses. Next slide. Now let's move to the other side of the budget equation. Let's talk about expenses and the cost pressures. Listed here are just the typical internal cost drivers. Next slide. This slide speaks to what we anticipate as for costs for group insurance plans, and it's projected to increase in the aggregate by 12.9% over FY 2025. That increase is specifically attributed to the medical and prescription plans, and the cost drivers, of course, are medical inflation trends, increased utilization, and also a driver this time is the prescription drug specialty spend. And what you're seeing here is what we're estimating the year-over-year cost increase will be in order for the funds to be able to cover that 12.9. Next slide. This slide covers the estimated cost for the other post-employment benefits, OPEB, which is primarily retiree health. The estimates here are based on last year's actuarial report. Please note that Bolton is scheduled to present to the 115 Trust Board this month and the Commission in November. And it's anticipated that what they will be presenting will show that the FY26 contribution will include a 4.4% increase in normal costs, but the hope is that it will be offset by a reduction in what is required as needed for our additional contribution to amortize to bring down our liability. So the hope is that actually there will not be a major adjustment in the requirements that are currently in FY25 compared to what we'll need to put in place for FY26.
Ms. McCo-Charles, is there something wrong with this slide? Am I missing something?
No, what you're missing is the fact that right now, based on the early read of the expectation for FY26, that there will be no budgeted increase. The amounts will be roughly what are sitting in the FY25 budget. So we can only hope that the final report will stay with this, and so the admin, park fund, and rec funds will not have to increase their budgets as it relates to OPEB.
Okay,
So
thank you.
you're used to seeing bars here, but right now we're in a situation where at least the early data is saying that that normal cost is going to increase, but we should be having to put in less for the additional contribution. We'll see what the actual numbers play out.
So it's intentionally bar free.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
The next slide is our retirement plan. And again, our consultant, I think it's Chiron, is expected to provide the new valuation report the third week in October with a presentation to the board in November. Now, this model right now is using the previous valuation expectation for FY26, which contain a very minimal increase, which is again why you're not seeing in any bars, because it said that our employer cost would be a total of $35.6 million. However, we also know, based on some other preliminary data, that there is a good chance that this is not going to remain like this, and that the employer cost could increase to over $38 million, which would be a 7.7% increase. And so if that is what is actually presented in the third week in October, then the Prince George's share could see an increase of $1.5 to $2 million that would be spread across the admin, park, and rec funds. But again, we'll update this data when we get the latest valuation report. Next slide. This slide just covers the projections for employee compensation that we're using for FY26. And so you can see that it totals to $10.4 million. Next slide. This slide speaks to the expectations for the CIP related costs in the park and rec funds. And as shown here, we are modeling by including $35.3 million for the park fund and then $20 million for the rec fund. And the debt service is based on an expectation that we will put out to market $65.8 million in new bonds during FY26. Next slide. This slide combines all of the major cost changes so that you can see it in a snapshot. And if we were looking at this very chart in comparison to last year, what you would be looking at is the fact that last year we also were expecting an additional $3 million in benefit costs. It's just right now it all is attached to the health and insurance plans right now. Compensation is largely the same as last year's expectations, and the CIP and related costs, though, are a tad bit greater due to the need for a substantial increase in the rec fund support of the capital program. So as you can see, it's the last line shows that there was a desire to increase the support from $13 million to $20 million. So that is that $7 million you're seeing in that last column there. Next slide. So this slide presents the current outlook for each fund. This is the administration fund for FY26. As you can see, this fund is positioned to sustain itself without a tax rate increase. Although the estimated increase in expenditures is nearly $1.7 million and looks to exceed the anticipated growth in tax revenues, the fund has other revenue changes and you will hear me repeat this 2 more times. We have made a decision with regard to how we're going to budget our expectations for interest earnings, and as a result of that, there are additional revenues that will be budgeted to support ongoing operations. So we're putting it in because we're feeling more comfortable that it is available to support operations. So for the admin fund,
Charles, let me jump in on that. Commissioners,
sure.
colleagues, it's a conversation that I was involved in with our Secretary Treasurer and with Ms. Bacot-Charles, and it's a conservative approach, but we're quite comfortable that this reflects the historic reality of the interest rates, and so we can get into more detail around this, but it doesn't feel risky. It actually feels appropriate.
And for the admin
So
fund,
are you saying that the current interest rate on our funds is such that that it'll make up for the difference between the property tax revenue and the expenditures?
it will serve that purpose, and we have been experiencing that difference. So we're very conservative in our earnings expectations. So we were using 100,000, but repeatedly for the admin fund, we've been, at least 2 million, if not better, for several years now. So what it is we're recognizing the fact that those funds have helped us to create the picture you're seeing to the right. So why not budget them from the start? Now we are, if you're looking at the actuals, we are still maintaining conservatism in the fact that we did not increase the expectations above what we experienced in FY24 for FY26, just given, the uncertainty that we have in the market right now. But nevertheless, we are confident that we're going to receive 2.4 million on the over 70-some million that we have right now sitting in that fund.
It's still a conservative projection. It's just it's a less conservative projection. It's a more accurate projection. But it's still conservative enough. That's our read on it.
Thank you.
So again, as you can see, this fund is able to definitely sustain itself, and in fact, our expectation is coming out of FY26 that we will still be in a position where we will likely be increasing the fund balance. Next slide. This slide speaks to the park fund and its outlook for FY26. Again, this fund is positioned to sustain itself in FY26 without a tax increase. As you can see here, the estimated increase in property tax revenue is $4 million. The advent of us updating our expectations for interest earning adds another $10 million. And again, as shown to the right, we totally expect that this fund balance will continue to meet the 5% reserve requirement and be able to sustain operations. And basically, though there won't be much growth in the fund balance, we're also not going to be in a place where we'll be drawing it down in FY26 is the expectation. And that is basically related to the fact that, again, in a previous slide, we expected our debt service requirements just in alignment with how we're actually going to market has created almost a $2 million savings year over year between FY25 and FY26. So again, that's why expenditures look like they're going to be lower budget to budget, but it's in alignment with what we're actually experiencing. Next slide, please. This slide is the recreation fund. Again, it is positioned to sustain itself without a tax increase. But unlike the other two funds, the rec fund is expected during FY26 to use $16 million in reserves in order to meet the increasing capital program needs. The estimated increase in the property tax revenue will provide $2.1 million in new money, and this fund will experience $2.6 million more available to it in FY26 based on the interest earnings. But again, this is our one fund that is from this point forward going to be, in order to maintain operations and support the CIP program, have to make use of the reserves. Next slide. And this slide just provides the 6-year outlook, starting with the admin fund. Again, this fund is projected to remain fiscally sound throughout the entire 6-year period, taking you through FY31. And you can see that there's very little divergence in the trends in growth for both expenditures and revenues. And so as a result of that, the bottom chart shows you what's happening with the fund balance. So again, this fund and its typical growth rate is such that it is going to remain fiscally sound through the outlook period. The next slide, please. This is the park fund using a similar view. Again, this fund is going to remain stable through FY30, but as shown here, it is anticipated to begin to make use of reserves after FY27. And again, that is in alignment with more of the need to meet the demands of the current CIP program. So you're going to draw down the reserves. And all of us do realize that has always been the expectation with regard to how the CIP is programmed, and the expectation that over time we would begin to see the drawdown of the reserves. So that's the park fund and how it will look, or it's projected to look in 6 years' time. And then the last one, next slide please, is the recreation fund. And again, I hate to keep saying this is the one that's unlike the others in the fact that the fund is projected to encounter some fiscal stress come FY29. And in fact, it again is the fund that beginning in the current year, we believe that we're going to annually draw down reserves again in support of the capital program. So as a result of that, this is the fund that will require assessment to consider commitments regarding the capital improvement program and tax rates in a couple of years, just given if the capital program's execution mimics what we're seeing, we will need to again reassess it at a later point in time. Next slide. And this last slide here is just a reminder of the overall budget development and budget proposal adoption timeline. As you can see here, your review of development will get underway in real earnest during a work session that has been scheduled for the 24th. And then the final planning board approval for the FY26 proposed budget will be sought on November 21st. And then the commission's approval will be sought on December 18th in order for us to meet the submission requirements of the county exec and council by January 15th. And so that concludes what I wanted to share as the budget outlook, and I'm definitely open to questions and concerns.
I had one
Do you
question.
have any recommendations?
We've got Commissioner Washington, then Commissioner Geraldo.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Charles, for going back to the 6-year recreation fund. I think it was slide 20. You mentioned that we may be considering a tax increase in fiscal year 29. Did I understand you correctly?
What I was indicating that at that point, or prior to that point, of course, we will need to reassess and then look from both sides, if you will, the commitment through the capital improvement programs. Perhaps there's adjustments that need to be made there, and then the discussion of whether a tax rate, and if it's determined a tax rate is something, then of course modeling what would be the appropriate rate to situate us such that, similar to the fact that we haven't had a tax rate increase since 2016, would we pursue a manner in such that we would seek a rate that then wouldn't need to be raised for a stated period of time. So it's beginning those conversations in another couple of years to shore up the picture that we're looking at right now.
Yeah, I understand. And, you know, a 6-year no tax increase is always favorable from my perspective. And because we're forecasting this far out, I would just ask that we not wait 2 years, but start looking at ways now to maybe, you know, look at alternatives to a tax increase. Since we're forecasting that far out, let's be, you know, proactive and plan towards not having to do it, as opposed to even it becoming something for discussion. So, but I was very pleased to hear no tax increases throughout your presentation. So, and job well done. Thank you. That's it for me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Geraldo?
Yeah, part of what I was thinking of was raised by Ms. Washington. So looking at this budget, do you have any recommendations that you can make now for down the road?
What I will, well,
What I will oops.
Uh-oh.
There we go. That should work.
No
no
feedback
feedback
now?
now?
Oops.
Mute your computer.
Okay, better now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I will say is, because I'm only 8 months into to this, that I will say that I don't feel prepared to make a recommendation outside of what has already occurred with regard to the fact that, you know, we upwardly adjusted expectations related to investment earnings. And there are other places where I have identified, if you will, a variance between what our actual expenditure patterns have been versus what we've been budgeting for. So that is kind of what my focus in putting together the FY26 budget will be, to help with adjusting this picture moving forward. And then I make the commitment to, as was just indicated, be more proactive in terms of moving forward after that, to do some modeling and some scenario building such that we can if need be, how do I want to say, if need be, it's a change in course, that we start talking about changes in courses sooner rather than later.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Char. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much.
And to both of your comments, I just say that, you know, this is mostly a conversation with the Department of Parks and Recreation and us, and we can have the leadership from DPR engage with us in this conversation to see what our options are and how best we want to approach it, and again to include the public at large as well, because, you know, these are big decisions. It costs money for us to do what we do. And, you know, to do that, to have that conversation and that cost benefit analysis, now is the time, because we don't want to be dealing with this in 2 years. We want to be having these conversations now.
I have a question, but Peter, maybe you know better. I don't know, but what is going to be the impact of any of this with the approval that we did today for the ERP? I know there's $7 million.
That is minimal for this, because only a piece of that, and a relatively small piece of that, is sort of newly coming out of DPR's budget.
Okay.
So a lot of that has actually just been planned for a while. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it seems that that would be capitalized, I would think, to some degree. I don't know, the ERP piece.
There are all sorts of restrictions, and this is a good education, has been for me, but it can be for all of us too, around what we can or can't capitalize based on the different funds. And so I'm learning as I go on that too, but maybe, you know, in the near future, we could sort of get ourselves even more educated around the budget process so we can help guide them and make good decisions around this. Because I had the same question, Mr. Washington. I was trying to figure out what we can or can't capitalize.
Sounds good. And Ms. Charles, you may be 8 months in, but you present like an 18-year tenured professional. So great job.
Yeah,
You didn't
really
make it
well
sound like you were 8 months in.
Yes, this is
thank you.
I believe this is my third time hearing Ms. Charles, and she really has laid it out so that even a very lay person can understand. So thank you for your professionalism, and we're glad to have you on board.
Absolutely. I associate myself with all those remarks.
I want to jump in and ask something like kind of nitty gritty in the details, and then zoom back out and ask a different question about something that's a little bit bigger picture. And I'm doing the nitty gritty right now just because we sort of stumbled into it. But I'm interested in thinking about, particularly from the Parks Department, whether we can utilize PAYGO to offset some of the property tax revenues potentially in some of these systems a little bit better. I know that we're going to get more testimony from written testimony from the public coming up over the next couple weeks until the middle of October. But we've already heard about one particular spot that might have potential revenue streams if we were to invest in infrastructure. And then we heard from another group of people that had sort of identified a smaller kind of service in one of our parks where we might have misclassified some of the recreational space. So the first one, maybe I'm too vague, but the first one was about the ice hockey rink and whether or not we could actually build the walls. And then if it might be too costly, but then we could potentially utilize PAYGO as a way to finance some of that stuff, particularly if they're going to have tournaments and other stuff coming up. But then the second one is like, did we misclassify the tennis domes that are at two of our parks or the bubbles that we need to shift them over into other funds, which isn't going to make a huge difference on the cost and the things that you've presented. But I at least wanted to pose those things as we're kind of like fixing stuff or changing things and figure out, do we have other items that are potentially in funds that shouldn't be there that we should fix to kind of get straightened out while we're in good fiscal stance. So that's my nitty gritty question. My bigger picture question is that Chair Shapiro had alluded to like interest rates or sort of this environment. I just wanted to know, how are we thinking about the next couple of years with respect to interest rates and our funding or the bonds that we're floating? Because it looks like the Fed's going to go through and reduce the Fed funds rate a couple more times, or at least a bit more in magnitude, which could potentially decrease the cost of funding for ourselves as that happens. So we might be able to take advantage of that in a potentially at least a short window, unless they get stuck in this sort of quantitative easing again for a couple more years. And I just wanted to hear how we were thinking through that from like a bond or budget kind of perspective.
Oh, good questions, both. Terry, let me take the first one because the first one, I think, Commissioner, this is a really, really good conversation for us to have with DPR leadership, and sooner than later, because I was struck by the comments about Walls for Wells and the tennis bubbles as well, and how that fits into our capital program. So it really is a programming issue. So if that's okay, I'll talk to DPR leadership and have them come in, and we'll have a budget specific conversation where we can get into the nitty gritty, if that's okay with you all.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I think that would be great to have.
Okay, and then on the bigger question, Ms. Charles, I'll turn back to you on what our forecasts are. That might even be more of a Gavin question than a you question, but I'm sure you can take a bit of it yourself.
Well, what I will share is to your point, there is a great deal of work that is ongoing between Parks and Rec Finance to make sure that we are leveraging and taking the greatest advantage of kind of what you were just speaking with regard to our use of bonding versus our use of the cash pay-go. And so there is a review underway to just make sure that we are using the two mechanisms in a manner that, again, will provide us the best outcome and move us further down the line. So you will likely hear that there are some discussions with regard to things that were previously perhaps bonded that are no longer going to be bonded. But that then allows us to have the room to be able to bond the larger projects that are fast approaching in the planned CIP. So just sharing that there is a great deal more discussion to drive the efficiency that you're speaking to and make sure that we are gaining as much as we can from a financial leverage standpoint between the two ways of financing our capital program.
Okay, so then maybe I'll tee it up for Gavin for when they come back with like the specific departments, because I would just like to see like whatever do we have baked into like our projections or the future kind of curves that you've got here, like a lower interest rate environment that would give us those kinds of bond advantage or the financing advantages on that. And I realize like it goes beyond probably what you're prepared for today. So I would just be interested in seeing what he's thinking about in terms of scenarios, and what would be kind of a good scenario, a quote unquote good scenario for us on the borrowing side, that may not be a good scenario for the economy if the Fed goes really deep into some of its changes. But I'm just interested in thinking and seeing how he's thinking through that, and if we are kind of taking advantage of those potential opportunities in our forecasts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for that. Other questions for Ms. Charles? All right, so we'll have follow up with DPR leadership. We'll have follow up with Ms. Charles and with Gavin Cohen, our Secretary Treasurer, based on the conversations that we've been having. And I would really associate myself with the remarks of my colleagues. Ms. Charles, you don't sound like you've been here for 8 months. I appreciate how much of a handle you have on all this and the professionalism of the presentation. So thank you. Thank you very much. It's comforting.
All right. Yeah.
It is. It is.
Well, again, I appreciate the vote of confidence.
Thank you. All right, so commissioners, I don't think we have any other business before us. Without objection, thank you all for your work today, and we are adjourned.
Good day, all.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Here.